2022 continues with the person you couldn't wait to hear from. So please welcome back to the show, the host of the Keizer Report, and of course, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet when it comes to the topic of Bitcoin. Max Keizer, welcome back to the show here.
Hey, Daniela, great to be with you.
And I just want to say, just for you, Max, I came dressed for the occasion, wearing my Max It Up t-shirt. That's how excited I am for this interview. How's your new year going so far?
It's great. You know, we are seeking citizenship in El Salvador to become a citizen of the first country in the world to make Bitcoin legal tender. And it's really the most exciting thing to happen in Bitcoin since, I guess 2009 when Bitcoin started. And we're also helping in the project of volcano bonds. So the country is going to raise $1 billion on volcano bonds. And I think we can get that number up toward the $20 billion level. My goal is to make this country debt-free. So this is some of the excitement that's going on here in El Salvador, thanks to the President Bukele, who made Bitcoin legal tender.
Yes, and that, as we know, was historic news when that came out. I want to talk to you about that. Obviously, a lot of excitement about your return on this show, because last year you came on my show and you gave your famous outlook for 2021. Max Keizer's 2021 Bitcoin forecast. You're hearing it for the first time here, folks.
I'm going with $220,000 per Bitcoin.
That, of course, made worldwide headlines, 220,000. We will talk about that, of course, but we do want to talk El Salvador. We want to talk about what's happening right now in Bitcoin. And of course, I will also reveal my Bitcoin forecast that I wrote down with Max. I also have a forecast for Bitcoin.
Okay.
I'm not going to say it. I'm going to write it down on a piece of paper, fold it, and put it into this desk that you don't see in the shot. Who came closer to their target? Do we have a wager on that?
Yeah, I think we wagered a cup of coffee.
Well, stay tuned to the end to find out, folks. All right. First, let's start with the price, Max. Okay, this is number one question, so let's just clear the air here. And I always say it's extremely difficult to come on a show and make forecasts. You were calling for, Bitcoin over 220,000 by November. You said you use proprietary information when you come to these calculations. I've now seen that you've moved that target. So let's talk about, first of all, what you think went wrong with what was a huge miss on forecast here, because we're now at a 3-month low. As we're taping this now, Bitcoin's hovering around 42,000.
Right. So, well, as you know, we first started covering Bitcoin in 2011 when it was $1. And at that time, I was forecasting $100,000 per Bitcoin based on its ability to grab a significant portion of the global Forex market and to compete with gold. Now, as far as 2021 goes, I said, hey, we're going to get to 220,000 per coin, which is a typical 4-year cycle. What we had in 2021 was that massive China collapse in mining and hash power. So mining and the hash power collapsed 50%. We have since recovered that now, and we're about to hit new all-time high in hash rate. And so that's why I'm pushing my $220,000 target from 2021 to 2022. So there's really a couple of numbers to keep in mind. There's price, there's hash rate, and there's the difficulty adjustment. Those are the 3 things you have to keep in mind. I've always said that price lags hash rate, that hash rate precedes price. And so we're going to see new all-time highs in the hash rate and followed by new all-time highs in Bitcoin price. The underlying fundamentals have only gotten stronger. The fiat money world is crumbling. Inflation is out of control. The Bitcoin network is getting stronger. If you look at the on-chain analysis, that is to say, the people who are actually doing transactions, not derivatives, but on the actual Bitcoin blockchain, we see an increase in the holdings of Bitcoin. The recent price action is driven mostly by derivatives. So the same kind of price discovery you see in the gold market that's kept gold now flat for 10 years and hasn't really budged at all. You start to see some of the derivatives have an influence on the price discovery in Bitcoin. ultimately it doesn't matter because the demand for Bitcoin is virtually infinite. Because fiat money is, as it always does, it's going to go to zero. All fiat money goes to zero, and we'll see that with the U.S. dollar as well. And Bitcoin is now, if you listen to guys like Bill Miller or Paul Tudor Jones or any of the other major hedge funds out there, they're now openly saying that Bitcoin competes with gold. It's going to get a market share of gold. Gold's market share is about $8, $9, $10 trillion. Bitcoin is going to eclipse that market cap at some point. So all the fundamentals are very strong. So I'm just bumping my $220,000 target from 2021 to 2022. I've been doing well for the past 10 years since I first recommended Bitcoin at $1. So nobody's really complaining.
No, and I do want to point that out, that 2021 was a miss, but you have accurately called Bitcoin's price in the past. Now, few things I want to point out with what you've said. One, I feel that there was a lot of exuberance and excitement surrounding the Bitcoin price last year, but this year, the bears are out in full force. Yeah, you named some names, but a lot of the experts have been coming on, like Gareth Soloway or Novogratz also, are saying that we could see a crypto winter here. Soloway comparing the moment that we're seeing him here in Bitcoin to a .com moment. Now he's bullish long term, and yes, he's just one technical trader, but other technical traders are also pointing that we will be entering severe bear territory here, having breached the 46,000 target, and we could be here for a few years. Do you pay attention to the technicals?
I have no idea who Soloway is. And Novogratz is a hedge fund guy who's kind of on a revist who came later into the game. I mean, he's a trader. And for traders who are aggressive traders, that's a different game. You know, I'm not really a trader. I'm a holder. I'm a hodler. I don't invest in Bitcoin. I divest out of fiat money and I divest out of gold. And I'd rather be a day early than a day late. As you see, Jay Powell and the central banks around the world are in panic mode. They're printing at a level that you'd have to compare to Weimar Germany or Zimbabwe, and they're literally about to torch this economy and the fiat money world down to the ground. So there's only one unconfiscatable, uncensorable money in the world, and that's Bitcoin. And that's the fundamental story. So you should own it. You should own it aggressively. If you're a trader and you're looking for trader signals and technical analysis, I agree with what Peter Lynch said about technical analysts. They're 100% correct when looking backwards. They're 100% correct in predicting the past, right? I don't know of a single technical analyst billionaire in the world. Technical analysis is essentially astrology for men.
Okay, fair enough. When you were on, and I asked, well, when you come to your forecast, how do you come up with these forecasts? And you say that's your secret sauce. You have proprietary information. You're just not making up numbers here. So when you say, so the all-time high for the hash rate, is that part of the equation that you're looking at?
Hash rate precedes price. So hash rate is the strength of the network. It adds to the security. It's something that no altcoin or what we call shitcoins have, including Ethereum. They're all centralized and they're all vulnerable and they don't have any hash rate at all, really. Whereas Bitcoin has most of the hash rate, the overwhelming majority of the hash rate. The hash rate keeps going higher. When countries like El Salvador make Bitcoin legal tender, now my understanding is that several other countries will follow suit and make Bitcoin legal tender as well. That's another huge fundamental plus for Bitcoin going forward. The 4-year cycle, which is tied to the halving that happens every 4 years, has been a somewhat reliable predictor of price going back to the beginning of Bitcoin. I've lived through 3 90% drawdowns in Bitcoin since I first started buying it in 2011. And this particular drawdown is not particularly worrisome. It's a great buying opportunity. People are always saying, oh, Bitcoin at 75,000 or 65,000 is too expensive. I wish it were cheaper. Well, okay, it's cheaper. So you should be backing up the truck, loading the boat aggressively. Only have money in fiat shitcoins or gold that you're willing to lose. Any money you have in Bitcoin is unconfiscatable, it's uncensorable. That's your only wealth. That is your only wealth, is your Bitcoin wealth. Everything else is confiscatable or going to be inflated away out of existence.
And we'll get to gold. I always get to gold with you at one point. But sticking to the hash rate, why are you confident we'd see an all-time high in the hash rate this year then?
Because the network is growing rapidly, and it is already about hitting a new all-time high. So it's flirting with new all-time highs as we speak already in the first few weeks of 2022. So that trend should continue because more and more miners are coming into the network because mining is a hugely profitable business. The average miner's cost per Bitcoin is under $8,000 per coin. So at these levels, it's a wildly profitable business. And you're going to see more and more countries start to mine Bitcoin. Remember, I said on your show a few years ago that I was anticipating what I call hash wars or the hash race. So right now you've got El Salvador, who's accumulating Bitcoin. They're doing Bitcoin volcano bonds. And we see a couple of other countries mining Bitcoin and adding Bitcoin to strategic reserves. I think once a country in the G7 starts to accumulate and mine Bitcoin, it'll set off like a space race that we saw in the 60s where the Soviets put up the Sputnik satellite and it launched the space race and a man landing on the moon. I think once a G7 country comes out and says, hey, we're adding Bitcoin to our reserves, we're mining Bitcoin, then you're going to see other countries say, hey, we got to get in on this. The U.S. will come in. The U.S. will come in and start to mine Bitcoin. You've already got a lot of senators in the U.S. right now, like Cynthia Lummis. A third, as I understand it, a third of all of her contributions coming in right now are coming from Bitcoiners. And now we've got many congressmen and senators that are into Bitcoin. We've got governors into Bitcoin. You've got the mayor of Miami. Wyoming is probably going to become a Bitcoin state. Texas could very well secede from the United States and become a Bitcoin state. So this is the power of Bitcoin. It shows you what you can do with unconfiscatable, uncensorable, perfect money. You start to think differently about the world around you and the governments around you.
Okay, absolutely. If a G7 country were to step in, that'd be a game changer, of course. But how plausible is that for you? How far away?
I think it's 100% guaranteed certainty. Because we live in a fiat money world, and the fiat money world is collapsing, and Bitcoin is the go-to currency if you want to have unconfiscatable, uncensorable, perfect money. You're going to go to Bitcoin. That's the choice. So, and also in this region, in Central America and Latin America, El Salvador's economy is going to be, they're going to report a 10, 11% growth. Next year, they're looking to do 20%. So now all the countries in this area are like, we're not going to let El Salvador, grow without being challenged at all. So we've got other countries in the region who are now saying, yeah, we want to jump in and we want to get in on this and we want growth as well. So in Africa and Nigeria, for example, you see huge Bitcoin adoption. Now you've got all kinds of countries in Africa who are going to leapfrog the whole 20th century build out of the banking infrastructure that has kept them essentially a colony of the Wall Street banks. They can leapfrog that and say, you know what, we don't need any of the Wall Street banks. We don't need any banks at all. We can do everything we need with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is our bank. We can save, we can transact, that's our bank, and it's growing like wildfire. So a lot of these things go unnoticed because what's happening in Central America or in Africa don't make the nightly news in America. They're too concerned about Nancy Pelosi's eyebrows or, distractions.
On the distractions, on the topic of central banks, that was another part of the equation to your forecast, that we would see one central bank fail in 2021. What was that bank that you were predicting, and have you pushed that forecast out too, or what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, they're very weak. So the European Central Bank, the ECB, is one that I said was very, very weak. But I think, you look at any of the central banks around the world and they're just in a very weakened state. The leverage in the Fed they're much more leveraged at the Fed than Enron was before Enron collapsed. So these central banks are just enormously problematic. I think the central bank in Lebanon did collapse. It did effectively collapse. So I was correct.
Right, but I believe you were calling for the ECB to collapse.
Well, Daniela, I said a central bank will collapse. Lebanon collapsed, so that's pretty good. I put that up against any of your other predictions and prognostications of any of the other guests.
Okay, I want to get back to the pressure on Bitcoin right now. You mentioned derivatives, but what about the Fed's taper program that's revving up steam and looking to become more and more aggressive?
Daniela, you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. How many times are you going to fall for this fake news? How many times is Lucy going to pull the football away from Charlie Brown? This is the same thing we've been seeing for 20 years. The Fed threatens taper, and then they loosen policy. It never happens. Inflation under Paul Volcker's time was racing higher less than it is right now. And Volcker took interest rates up to 15, 16%, right? So they're already way behind the curve. Interest rates to deal with the current inflation should already be 8, 9, 10% on the overnight rates at the Fed. That's the way it should be if they were doing their job correctly. So why don't they do it? Well, for one thing, the duration risk of the Fed's balance sheet is way out on the curve. So even a 1 basis point rise in rates totally obliterates the Fed's balance sheet. They're in the weakest position they've ever been. So too with every central bank in the world. They're not going to taper, Danielle. They're going to print. They're going to announce, all we need is 1 or 2 more down days on the NASDAQ, and they're going to announce a $10 trillion bailout or more. That's the pattern. We've seen it now for 20 years. I can't believe people are still fooled by this.
Because they want to keep the stock market up.
Who's an investor in the stock market? Nancy Pelosi, senators, congressmen, insiders, market manipulators, right? Of course they only look at the stock market. That's the only gauge. There is no price stability, and employment is a complete disaster. They're ostensibly what they're supposed to be looking at, but they don't. They only look at their friends in Congress and on Wall Street. It's a rolling bailout of Wall Street, and it's a gift. Insider trading is legal in Washington, and they're cashing out. They're making hundreds of millions and billions of dollars playing this game, pretending that they're not extraordinarily corrupt. It's an extraordinarily corrupt situation. Jay Powell, is corrupt. That's the bottom line.
You think lawmakers, and this question was posed to Pelosi, should be banned from investing in U.S. equities or stock markets in general?
It's a conflict of interest. I mean, if I look at the news, if I go to like MSNBC or CNN, I'll see a report on COVID featuring quotes from senators who own Pfizer, and then I'll take a break and see an ad from Pfizer. Then we come back to Anderson Cooper talking about it, we just saw an ad from Pfizer, who's got on as his guest a politician who owns Pfizer stock and is passing laws that are beneficial to Pfizer. Now, this is the most shameless and corrupt scandal ever in American history. I don't think you can really point to a time in American history when you had such a shameless pilfering of the public wealth from these politicians. They're literally stuffing bags of money every day, and the media is completely culpable in this. They don't have any investigative journalism at all in America. That's been pretty much obliterated. People have to resort to listening to podcasts like Joe Rogan to get any semblance of what's going on. So this is, yes, I would say that insider trading by politicians who make the laws that impact those companies, that's a conflict of interest that is anathema to the tenets of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. It's anti-constitutional. It's anti-American. People, the U.S. complains. They're saying, "Oh no, we have foreign governments interfering with our elections." Well, we have politicians in D.C. interfering with our elections. They're the corrupt ones. They're projecting their corruption onto other governments. Nobody's more corrupt than they are.
Are they, what's a nice word for lying?
Prevarication. Prevarication.
On inflation numbers, you mentioned inflation. Do you buy the numbers they're telling us? Have we reached peak inflation? I want you to go a little deeper on Max Keizer's thoughts on the inflation story here.
Nobody believes that inflation is running at what the government says it's running at. That's absurd. Nobody believes it anymore. I mean, for years they were able to mask it because labor was outsourced to China, so we didn't see it show up in labor costs. But when you have like Paul Krugman at the New York Times say that inflation's good for the lower classes and the working class, but then at the same time, you see a report that categorically, patently states that the inflation has reduced purchasing power to levels that are make any wage gains insignificant, if not negative. You know, you have to ask yourself, who is Paul Krugman working for? Who is the New York Times working for? It's not for Americans. What foreign government is directing Paul Krugman at this point? He's not. He's saying things that are patently false and misleading. So I have to really question that. So, I mean, Daniela, it's no secret that inflation is running, 15%. If you look at loss of purchasing power, you're talking 15%. It's really galloping out of control.
Bitcoin fixes that, though. How?
Because it's finite supply, and it's got infinite demand, and it's a safe harbor. And that's where people are going to protect themselves against fiat money. You can't print Bitcoin. You can print fiat money. Gold supply is not fixed either. So it's the go-to commodity. That's why Paul Tudor Jones calls it the fastest horse in the race. Paul Tudor Jones is one of the first people to come out and say, maybe 2.5 years ago, that inflation was going to be a problem. And this is when policymakers were saying that they were warning against deflation. He was saying, no, it's actually inflation. It's going to become a problem. That's why I'm buying inflation-sensitive assets. And Bitcoin is the fastest horse in the race. And he put 1% of his portfolio into Bitcoin. I believe he's raised that allocation to 5%. Then Michael Saylor, of course, came out and said, hey, the monetary energy of the US dollar is depreciating by 15% a year. That's the true inflation number. Your purchasing power is being destroyed by 15% a year. We're buying Bitcoin as our play against inflation. And I must say, heroically, Michael Saylor could have borrowed money from the Fed and bought back their own stock, and he could have made a lot of money doing what Microsoft and Google and Amazon and all those corporations do. They buy back their own stock, which, by the way, was illegal not too long ago, with that ultra low interest rate from the Fed. You see, when the Fed says there's not much inflation, therefore they're going to keep interest rates low, they're doing that so that insiders can borrow at those ultra cheap rates, buy their own stock. Their executive stock options double, triple, quadruple. They cash out and they make a lot of money. But us who are not in on that game, if we go on our credit card, it's still 18%, Daniela. How come my credit card interest rate is still 17, 18% during the last 5 to 10 years when rates have come down substantially? How come my Visa, MasterCard is not at 5 or 6%, right? Because it's what I call interest rate apartheid. If you're not a friend of Goldman Sachs, you live in a Bantustan, you live in a ghetto of high interest rates, and you're squeezed, and you never get to save any money. But if you're a friend of Goldman Sachs, you get to borrow at 0%, invest in assets, and you collectively are buying the same assets. Those go up in price, then you can use those as collateral to borrow more money and just repeat this over and over again. That's why the wealth and income gap, the wealth gap is so high in America. It's higher now than even during the robber baron era because of this interest rate apartheid engineered by the Fed, condoned by Nancy Pelosi. And this is why Bitcoin is going to, $220,000 in the short term and going a lot higher as interest rates and the dollar create this insurmountable obstacle for anyone trying to save money who's not in Bitcoin.
How does one become a friend of Goldman Sachs? That's the real question.
It's very easy, Daniela. Goldman Sachs and the U.S. government, it's a revolving door. Look at who runs central banks around the world. Goldman Sachs executives. Who runs all the big banks and all the banking relationships and the Davos crowd and the IMF and the World Bank? Ex-Goldman Sachs executives. It's a revolving door of corruption. I mean, it's the most corrupt. country ever in history. If you look at the number of actual theft that's been going on, no country in history has stolen more from the people. Look at the interest rate arbitrage in the pension account. That's $5 trillion has been taken from pension accounts that should be yielding 4.5%, 5% on a normal interest rate scenario to the pockets of speculators and Goldman Sachs. That's a $5 trillion heist. Tell me in history a country that stole $5 trillion from its population. I'm waiting. Tell me. And that's just one of a multiple piece theft that's been going on for decades because of the central banks and the fiat money and the derivatives market and the insiders have collected a protected class of larcenistic, corrupt public officials and bankers that have no pushback whatsoever from the media, from government, or from any country. I would love if somebody in the Canadian government sent down the Mounties to help us deal with this corruption. We need help. World, America's the most corrupt nation in the world. Will some nation help us? Canada, send down your Mounties and arrest these people for us because we're incapable of governing ourselves.
I'm not even gonna go there.
Why not? You live in America too.
Right now I'm in Canada though, so I can tell you we won't go. All right, I want to get to some viewer fan / questions for Max Keizer, who is very revved up today. Max, you're bringing the heat. All right. This one comes from Thomas McLaughlin. He says, Max, why has BTC been acting like a risk asset correlated to the U.S. stock markets lately? And what will it take to decouple?
Bitcoin has always been decoupled. It's on its own vector. It's not correlated to anything. So it started off at essentially zero, and it's heading to be essentially Bitcoin. You have to understand Bitcoin is a 51% attack on the global energy. So 51% of all global energy will be dedicated to Bitcoin, and this will starve to death all fiat money, shitcoins, and gold. And the price is essentially going to infinity because in dollar terms, because the dollar is going to zero. So it's on its own vector. It's not correlated to anything. Occasionally, in any 6-month period, you could look at a chart and say, oh, why is this correlated or not correlated? But over 10 years, 11 years, it's not correlated to anything. It breaks all the rules. Again, as Michael Saylor has said, it smashes all the rules.
Okay, next question from CB. I know in the past you have responded and said that Bitcoin cannot be manipulated, but this is coming up more than once here. He says, does he not believe Bitcoin is now being managed similar to gold and silver?
Well, no, because unlike gold, you have with Bitcoin an impenetrable wall of encryption that protects the underlying protocol, and the demand ultimately is infinite. So Bitcoin has infinite demand, gold does not. And gold also is being replaced by Bitcoin. So gold is being demonetized the same way silver has been demonetized. So in the short term, you have derivatives traders and derivatives markets, and you do have a lot of the games that we see in various markets will have an impact on the short term on price. But if you look at the long-term chart, look at the 10-year chart, you see a very orderly, ascent higher, and that will continue really for during the course of everyone who's watching this during their lifetime. That will be the course of the price. It'll just continue to go up over your lifetime, my lifetime, and everyone who's watching this over their lifetime.
Yeah, this one's coming in from Mark. What are your thoughts on the CBDC and China rolling out their own digital currency? Does this help or hurt Bitcoin in the long run?
The Chinese CBDC is meaningless. It's just another centralized digital offering. It's not different than what they have currently. It's just more centralization. Bitcoin is decentralized. It's the only purely decentralized money ever in the history of the world. And the Chinese centralized digital coin, it is no competition. It doesn't mean anything. Someday China will capitulate and start buying Bitcoin. They're going to pay a lot more for it. They made a similar mistake 500 years ago during the Ming Dynasty when they burnt down their treasure fleet. China was on the verge of conquering the world. Then some bureaucrat got in office, decided that the merchants were too powerful, and they burnt down all their ships. Similarly, last year, China got rid of all their miners. It's probably the worst catastrophe economically for China since they burnt their treasure fleet 500 years ago. It's really, really stupid. They're going to pay the price dearly when they have to come back into the market and start accumulating Bitcoin at $1 million or $2 million a coin.
All right, Meme Sergeant Spliff asked, and a lot of silver questions came up for you. Can you please ask Max about his thoughts on the silver squeeze? Earlier in the 2010s, he was a big name behind it. Curious to get his thoughts on the progress made by Wall Street Silver, Reddit movement, etc.
Right. So at that time, if you recall, after the financial crisis of 2008, Bear Stearns was acquired by JP Morgan, and they inherited this unbelievably large silver short position. So at that time, if we got the price of silver up to, I forget the exact number, but I think it was maybe 150 or something an ounce, then we could have bankrupted JP Morgan and put them out of business. So we got the price from 15 to 50. That was thanks to the Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver campaign that we created back at that time. Then, of course, they increased the margin requirements, and the feds came in to bail out JP Morgan once again. And we saw the price now dip back to where it was. But that unique situation doesn't exist anymore. So it's no longer a viable play, in my opinion.
But are you a supporter of such movements? Like when you see this happening, are you like rooting for those guys?
I think the best movement is just buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a way to defund Wall Street, defund central banks, defund fiat money, defund shitcoins, defund gold. Just buy Bitcoin. Remember during our lifetime, Daniela, we had something called the Greenspan put, which started in the 1980s, and every time the markets came down, the Fed would come in to bail everybody out. That was called the Greenspan put, became the Bernanke put, the Janet Yellen put, now you have the Jay Powell put. They simply won't let markets function with true price discovery. They're constantly bailing people out. We live now in an era called the Bitcoin call. It's like just buy Bitcoin and watch everything else around you burn it to the ground, and you'll be fine.
At the last time we spoke, you still own gold and silver. You said you weren't planning on selling it because it was hard to sell your gold. It's offshore, whatever. Has that changed? Have you sold, or do you still hold your gold and silver?
I used it as collateral to buy more Bitcoin, and I've been easing out of it. So I'm not 100% out yet, but I hope to be this year.
Completely out of your gold and silver?
Yes.
All into Bitcoin. You're all in.
Yeah, of course, because that's the only thing that's going to survive.
Okay. Let me